Hi, my name is Daya Charchun. I'm a second-year student in criminology and socio-legal studies, as well as political science. I'm currently enrolled in a research opportunity course this past year, and we are studying institutional colonial histories within Toronto. And my project focuses on Sir Daniel Wilson's legacy, discovering the truth, past, present, and future of Sir Daniel Wilson. To start my presentation today, I just want to give a quick disclaimer that some content within the presentation may trigger or upset some viewers. There are four key components to today's presentation, and that includes history, who is Sir Daniel Wilson? Second, legacy, what is his legacy? What does that look like right now? Three, controversial, what is his controversial past? And four, moving forward, what does the future of Sir Daniel Wilson's legacy look like? So first, history. Let's discover who Sir Daniel Wilson is. So early life. He grew up in Edinburgh, Scotland. He's the son of Archibald Wilson and Janet Aiken Wilson. He grew up in a very religious household involved in the Baptist Church. He had many passions for academics and tradition. From an early age, Wilson was involved in his culture and traditions. He was invested in and proud of his Highland and Lowland Scottish identity. It was very important for him, again at the young age, and his father's influence on the importance of literacy, academics, and being creative. He also was involved, like I said, in academia starting in his youth, but his brother was a big part of that journey. They both encouraged one another to write down observations of language and their environment. So, who was Sir Daniel Wilson? Sir Daniel Wilson was a scientist, an ethnographer, an archaeologist, anthropologist, author, and educator. Anything you can think of in the realm of academia, he was involved in. Education, he went to the University of Edinburgh from 1831 to 1837. He had many research interests, which varied, and most of the research he did before arriving in Toronto was basically the history of Scotland. He was interested in various fields that were emerging at the time, such as ethnography, anthropology, and archaeology. He was also interested in the growth of material evidence of comparative analysis of skulls and human remains. He was interested in race categorization and interested in what is the new concept of quote unquote the new world. He studied the interaction and connection of indigenous people and Europe, particular focus on justifying colonization and making racist claims. And this kind of blurb about him and who he is comes from the University of Toronto archives. So, what was Wilson's timeline? This is a very brief timeline of his life and what he did. Again, he was a very divested scholar, very interested in lots of realms of work in anthropology and archaeology. So there is a lot to the work that he did do, but these are just a few pieces of kind of that help shape the story behind who he was and what he did do. So in 1837, he left Edinburgh for London to become a writer, and then he decided to come back in 1848 to kind of, well, he came back in 1842, but in 1848 he actually made his first publication, and this publication, Memorials of Edinburgh in the Olden Time, is important for his work in Scottish archaeology, which is something he was very passionate about and worked on before coming to U of T. In 1851, in his other published work, he focused on the term prehistoric into the English language. So he was one of the first people to kind of come up with this term of prehistory or prehistoric. And this is very an important key thing to note, which will come up upon later, of how he used the word prehistoric in his writing. In 1853, Wilson was offered and accepted the chair of history and English literature at the University College in Toronto. In 1859 to 1861, he served for the first time as the Canadian Institute president. In 1862, this is really essential. The book, Prehistoric Man, researches into the origin of civilization in the Old and New World. There are 2 volumes to this piece, to this work. This is one of his most famous works. This is where a lot of the quotes of that will pull through from my presentation today come from, and is just really essential to his understanding of the academic work he did in Toronto when he came to U of T. In 1880, he became the first UC president. Not the first one, but the first like for him first time him involving himself in the college. And then in 1882, he became the vice president of literary section of the Royal Canadian Royal Society. In 1887, he became the first University of Toronto president. In 1890, on February 14th, 1890, the University College fire occurred. So this is a big key in his timeline because a lot of his work in archaeology and anthropology and his realm of academia, most of his artifacts got burned down in the UC fire, which I will also touch on later in my presentation. In 1892, he did resign from his presidency in June of 1892, and he passed away 3 months later in August. So this is just kind of like a visual of him moving to Toronto, and just a map of that. So what was his role at the University of Toronto? Like I said before, he came to be the chair of history and English at U of T in 1853. But before 1901, most principals of U of T, quote unquote, the UC was the primary college before the federation of the college. He was president, and then he became president of U of T. So, or principal. He was principal of UC, and then now he became president of U of T under the Federation in 1901. And then it also just shows the times that he was president. Again, under the Federation in 1901, he became the president of all of U of T, and then principal of UC from 1880 to 1892. So, what work has Sir Daniel Wilson published? He has published quite a bit of work. Like I said, he was very much involved in every realm of academia you can find, and you can involve yourself in. He did it all. A lot of his work was either about Scotland and the archaeology there, or again his newfound ideas surrounding the new worlds around pseudoscience to involving himself in like the discussion of cranium and human remains and skulls and that type of looking at science, but justifying racist scientific claims as science. And we'll see that highlighted later on, but these are some of the books that kind of touch on that. So, what is his legacy? And I think this is really important to note because a lot of the times there are so many profs at U of T that come and go, and especially in the federation of the university itself. But Wilson's legacy really does show through physical spaces like the Sir Daniel Wilson residence, which was originally built in 1954 as a men's residence. And it is the second oldest residence hall at University College. It was named in his honor for his time as president and professor. This also symbolizes his impact as a professor and president, that a building and a residence building was named after him. His work and prestige allowed him, again, to be idealized and to have this building named after him, which it is still today. So another part of his legacy is the Sir Daniel Wilson Quad. Sir Daniel Wilson Quad is attached to the Sir Daniel Wilson Residence Hall. An important thing to note is that not just University College students who live at Sir Daniel Wilson Residence are interacting with the quad, but the quad is interacted by all of U of T all the time. So, what's so controversial about his past and his work? What is this controversy, and what is so questionable about the work that he did? Well, let's dive into it. There are many examples of him being controversial, as we'll see as we see. There are two main things that I did discover in my research, and that was the misogynistic ideology and the racist ideology. So, an example of the misogynistic ideology was this plaque is located in the Sir Daniel Wilson's residence quad. And that quad, there's a plaque, and on the plaque, it states that Wilson was deeply involved in debates surrounding university federation and the admission of women in 1890. This does not really state his stance on women entering the university. It is a very vague way of stating that he what his involvement was in the federation of women joining the college, and it's not a clear definition. So when I went into the university archives, an example of what he did have to say about women entering the university was very much no. He was very against women entering the university, and the way that they phrase it in the plaque is that he was deeply involved, but they don't state what exactly that involvement was and what extent that involvement was. In this case, we can see that obviously that extent was declining the notion of women entering the college. So another part, like I said, of another theme that I found was his racist ideology. And I'm going to just show a bunch of quotes from his collaboration book with Edward Burnett Taylor, titled Anthropology and Archaeology. So he states here, the conformation of the skull is second only to the color of the skin as a creation for the distinction of race. First of all, race has nothing to do with the shape of your skull. Again, this is a way that Wilson kind of created this fixation with creating distinctions of different his own race categorizations, as we'll see, to promote a Eurocentric ideology and thinking. Another example of classification of races, of the way he looks at race to promote European superiority. And here's another example of just a quote that he has kind of shaped the way he thinks, that shows the way he shapes the view of race. And it's really looking at a scientific view of looking at race. And race is not scientific. It's a social construct to put certain groups at the top of the social hierarchy. And being European as the most superior was kind of the way that he framed his work when he talked about race. Another example, the capacity of the cranium is estimated in cubic measure by filling it with sand, etc., with the general result that a civilized white man is found to have a larger brain than a barbarian or savage. So the way that he talks about people and races like civilized white man, they're the ideal. That is what society should be. Barbarian or savage, highlighting minorities as barbarian or savage, is obviously very discriminatory and racist, and he used this pseudo-science to make those claims. And it showcases white supremacy and this hierarchical view of race. So another example of his racist ideology was him having a museum within UC where he collected all his anthropology, archaeology artifacts and work. And he basically asked different people across Canada and different ethnographers and archaeologists as well of skulls. And we'll see here that he used them as a claim for classroom purposes. He used this museum as that this is a classroom purpose and that it's for my lectures to illustrate anthropology and archaeology and ethnology. But in reality, he really just wanted a space where he can do his own work. And this quote, please send me a note of the prices and condition of the skulls of races stated also of Hontant and Australian skulls. So it's he's using the university space, the museum, and he was allowed to use the space to have these skulls and classify them as different races and use that space for his racist pseudoscience. And he also, like I stated, kind of use the excuse that this is for my classroom, this is classroom purposes, this is lecture content. So that was his space where he kept those different skulls and human remains. So in 1890, on February 14th, the University College had a fire, and this basically destroyed the part where the museum was in the building. And actually, here is a brick from the original building. I think this was something that kept intact after the fire. So they're in the U-Terms, there is a space where there's different artifacts that still have made it out of the fire, but a lot of it was destroyed because of the fire. So when the museum burnt down, I saw when I was looking through Sir Daniel Wilson's diary on January 15th, 1890, he talked about 30,000 carefully selected volumes have vanished. The work of a lifetime is swept away in a single night. His, archaeology artifacts was gone basically because of this fire in 1890. So a lot of his work was diminished and vanished and gone because of the fire. So moving on from that, another example of racist ideology is his statement that Toronto has no history. As I was saying before, the term prehistory was coined by Sir Daniel Wilson, and this was used to temporary like categorize certain people from others. Again, mostly categorizing minorities and then white supremacy, white people as hierarchical in society. And history was written with some settlement for him. There was no history. Indigenous people had no history. They were prehistory before Europeans came into play. So another example of this is that Wilson, in his view, Canada or Upper Canada was unstoried. There was no history, there was no stories. Life didn't really start, or in his view, start until the colonization of Canada happened, of settler colonialism. And he did not take Indigenous existence before colonization serious. The history, it wasn't civilized, so why should it be considered history in the first place? This was his thinking, and he did not believe that Toronto, quote unquote, had any history, like I said, until Europeans arrived. Here is another long quote example from his book Prehistoric Man, just talking about the way that he views categorizations of race again. And again, the terms and language that he uses, savage versus a civilized man, is very important to note. Another example, just pulling things out of Prehistoric Man, is that what I really found is the way he thinks about the European settler is this rational thinker, civilized, like I've been saying, in control of his actions, a leader. And European civilization is something we should all achieve. This classification of being a white male is more moral and superior, and is just the version of this higher being an intellectual superior being. And a lot of this is connecting his work that he did was connecting science, colonialism, and religion. And again, more views regarding Indigenous people that can be seen throughout Prehistoric Man is he ignored the oppression of Indigenous people by white European settlers. He exaggerated the amount of warfare among Indigenous people prior to colonization, and Indigenous people were the ones that caused conflict between settlers because they resisted change, which is, again, a justification of settler colonialism, and just shows really his thinking of colonization and creating these institutes was a positive thing because we're creating more of a European mindset and settler mindset, which is ideal in his world. So moving forward, there's a lot of heavy content and a lot of stuff that Wilson said and did that is very controversial, as we've seen. And I think moving forward from that, we need to look at what his legacy is. So the interview process, I really wanted the second part of my project to be about incorporating student voice, which is something I'm very passionate about. So what do students think about Sir Daniel Wilson? What do they think the college should do, University College should do to move forward? And so I asked students about their thoughts and feelings regarding Sir Daniel Wilson and his legacy at UC and at UofT. And I said, what do they think about Sir Daniel Wilson as a figure being promoted and idealized by University College? What do they believe that the future of figures such as Sir Daniel Wilson should be? What is the connection between past, present, and future of a colonial institute such as University College? So these are the four essential questions that kind of guided me throughout my research part of my interview part of my research project, and that is who. Who are we focusing on? That is university college students. Specifically, I tried to involve the UC Literary and Athletic Society, the student government at UC. What? Having a conversation about Sir Daniel Wilson and his legacy moving forward, and what does that future look like? How? In person and online interviews. Why? Because it's important to look at the past and the figures who helped colonize and create our institutes. So what questions did I ask? I asked a lot of questions. A lot of them were repetitive, but I think it was very important to highlight what I was trying to achieve. So I asked them what their name was, what their connection to University College was. Did they have any information about Sir Daniel Wilson before I interviewed them? I asked them if they knew anything about his past. Did they know who he was? What do you think the college should do to move forward? How do you think we should look at UC as a colonial institute? What do you think decolonization looks like at our institute? Do you think that's education? Do you think that's renaming? Those type of questions. Do you think there should be more funding into programs like my ROP class or grants for students to continue to do research about, controversial figures, past figures at our university? Do you think it's essential that UC students or UofT students know more about legacies such as Sir Daniel Wilson? And what does that look like in your eyes? And these are kind of the main questions I framed my interview process also on. So moving forward, I think this is talking about participants, people that are interviewed. A major importance of interviewing and having conversations with Indigenous students at the college was something I hoped to do, and I wasn't quite able to do that. And I hope to, while I continue this project, hopefully to further that within my project. I think it's essential to incorporate Indigenous presence and look at decolonizing as a way of looking at decolonizing our institutes, because though Indigenous voices need to be heard, and it needs to be heard in not a performative way, but in an intentional way. And I think if the university were to do some sort of open forum about this and involve Indigenous voices, there needs to be an honorarium for Indigenous students to be interviewed, mental health support. Indigenous students should receive a compensation because they are taking their time to talk about triggering topics and topics that have affected their communities very deeply. And I think it's essential that we don't do this in a performative way, but we make sure voices are heard and voices are compensated. So also, I think a student should be allowed to ask the university more questions about moving forward, more platforms for students to question the university and the college about moving forward, and educate students on these histories. I also want to make sure that students from various intersectional identities are interviewed, people who are more vulnerable to experience racism, discrimination, sexism, inherent biases from the college. Those voices should be put forward, and that is something I did try to do during my interview process. So what were the university college students' takeaways? What were the interview takeaways? Most students were very surprised and stunned about the history regarding Sir Daniel Wilson. None of them, quite frankly, were uh, thinking that that was the direction that my presentation was going to go. And they were very interested in asking questions more about the controversial part of Sir Daniel Wilson. Many students lived at the Sir Daniel Wilson's residence, the ones that I did talk to, and they never heard about who he is and his work, which they all find kind of amusing. Many did note that Sir Daniel Wilson's legacy is a symptom of a bigger problem of the university, as the university forgets to acknowledge its colonial history. And lastly, the question regarding changing the plaque and renaming the residence slash quad had many mixed opinions. Some people thought this was a beneficial thing to move forward and helped create awareness about our colonized institutes, such as many students referenced TMU, formerly known as Ryerson University. As well, some participants do not think it would be beneficial and would be a waste of the university's time. And some just highlighted the urgency to have conversations with BIPOC students about the work, about Sir Daniel Wilson's work, and how it is very harmful to minority communities, and that we need to take a sensitivity approach to having conversations about this. So how did the students react to the moving forward part of the questions? A lot of them were saying transparency for people coming into the college, sensitivity towards minority students, because topics like Sir Daniel Wilson's work can be very triggering and it is a sensitive matter. There needs to be an inclusion for BIPOC student voices in how the college should move forward. More Indigenous art, identity, and presence at the college is very much needed. A lot of students did highlight this. In fact, education, number one thing that I received from the student interviews was education. Many students mentioned courses such as CDN 198 and CDN 197 needs to be mandatory for all university college students to take regardless of their major. And they also expanded this to a university breadth requirement course to making sure that all students, regardless of your major or your background or whatever, that you're learning about these histories of colonialism within our U of T and more specifically now UC Institute. And more funding for research and investigation from UC and UofT is essential. A lot of students said, we can't stop now. We have to continue this. We have to continue to look forward. And these are just some photographs from the UTARM's archival research in Rare Book Library that I visited. And this is Sir Daniel Wilson's folder. As we can see, I didn't really get to a lot of this, but there is so much to be, discovered about Sir Daniel Wilson still. And there's so many different colonial professors that have helped colonize our institute that need to be discovered and explored. And there is a lot more work to do. So I just want to put this in to highlight that, the work can be continued, and that is essential. So what is the future of University College? So the UC Truth and Reconciliation Open Forum. So in December of 2021, the University College Literary and Athletic Society, they put on an open forum for conversation to discuss the college's reports and initiatives to truth and reconciliation. And this discussion was very productive. It was able to produce ideas for the college to move forward, and it helped the Equity Commissioner at UC Lit to implement some initiatives for students. So what are my policy implications? What are my thoughts? First of all, education. We need to highlight, educate, and inform all UC students this information before and during their time at the college. This can look like orientation, maybe having a section in UC orientation for first years to discuss and disclose some of the colonial and not so great things about the college itself, having house meetings with dons to talk about this and for students to ask questions. And I think it's also important to have more open forums like the one done by UC Lit. We also need to have mandatory courses for UC and UofT students to understand these histories of colonialism within the university and how this impacts their daily lives. I don't think it's fair to have certain courses for certain majors and then not for others. Like, I think this should be a breadth requirement for anyone at the university and anyone who interacts with the university. Revitalization, the need for Indigenous perspective and involving them in the conversation and moving forward, the need to highlight Indigenous artwork and allow Indigenous students to feel heard, respected, and welcome is absolutely essential. This first starts by recognizing these shameful histories, which, continuing to discover Sir Daniel Wilson's thoughts, but also the other professors and people at the university in the past as well. BIPOC and female students should be a part of this conversation as well. Transparency. I think there needs to be a lot more transparency in public knowledge about, being accessible to learning and having this education. I think we need to further investigate people like Sir Daniel Wilson, but I think the college itself, UC, should be able to provide grants for students who want to learn and research about these past histories. And I think we really need to look at this institution critically and not through this singular lens that's always been promoted. I think we need to look at it holistically and incorporate intersectional identities into that. We need to investigate the impact, having conversation with BIPOC students about how they feel how this information makes them feel in, of course, a sensitive way, in a respectful manner, sharing stories, making sure students are feeling heard, connecting this again to the open forum that has been done by UC Lit, a new club or resource at UC that allows students to have these conversations. And again, the college needs to put funding into this, and they need to make sure that there's a space for Indigenous and other minorities at UC to feel heard in their frustration and anger. I just want to highlight that a lot of the students that I did talk to felt very frustrated and angry that they didn't know this information before I presented it to them, and that they wished that someone had educated it and talked to them about it. Critical conversation. Let's not let projects like mine end with no impact. Let's make sure there's critical conversation about UC and UofT, and this should be continual. The university has resources to create real action that start with recognition, conversation, and voices being heard. This is a major emphasis on student voices, like I want to mention again. I think that we have spaces at the university and funding and money to have this conversation about our history, and let's continue it and let's not stop here. I just want to end off today with a quote from Patrick Wolf. Settler colonialism is a structure rather than an event. Our histories, our colonial histories at our university are very important to the way that to the way that the university runs now, to the way that UC runs now. I think this is a very important subject that a lot of students don't know about or have the ability to understand or access that knowledge, and that is something that needs to be addressed. Indigenous students as well need to be able to feel welcome and heard. And I think that as an institute, we forget that, and that we need to make sure that we're incorporating everybody's voice into this. And how do we want to move forward is by doing that. And that is all that I have to say. Thank you so much for listening to me speak about Sir Daniel Wilson today. And I hope that you can take the one thing you can take away from my presentation is how important it is to look critically at our institutes and to continue to look at them that way. So thank you very much.